The cold gray Atlantic water slapped against the hull of the overturned RHIB, a sound that was far too loud in the sudden, shocking quiet. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Thorne, his lungs burning, fought his way to the surface, gasping for air that tasted of salt and diesel fuel. The world was a chaotic mess of darkness, roaring waves, and the frantic shouts of his men. Just moments before, they had been a perfectly executed covert insertion team, slipping through the inky blackness towards the coastal compound. Now, they were scattered debris. The mission had been a trap, a damn good one. The intelligence was solid, the coordinates precise, but someone had tipped them off. As their rigid-hull inflatable boat had rounded the rocky outcropping, the night had erupted. A rocket-propelled grenade, fired with terrifying accuracy from the shore, had turned their world upside down. The explosion was a thunderclap of orange fire that shredded the night, flipping the boat and sending 8 of America's finest Navy SEALs tumbling into the freezing, unforgiving sea. Marcus, a 15-year veteran with a chest full of medals and a reputation for icy calm under fire, felt something he hadn't felt in a decade. Pure, unadulterated terror. It wasn't for himself. It was for his men. He saw Chief Petty Officer Miller, his number 2, struggling to stay afloat, and a gash on his head painting the water around him black. He saw 2 other shadows, Edwards and Jones, clinging to a piece of wreckage. But where were the others? Where was Lopez? Where was the new kid, Reynolds? "Sound off!" Marcus roared, his voice a ragged command against the wind. He spat out a mouthful of seawater, his mind racing through contingencies. They were compromised, adrift, and sitting ducks. The shore, their target just minutes ago, was now the most dangerous place on Earth. Every light in the enemy compound, which should have been dark, was now blazing. Searchlights cut swaths across the water, and he could hear the distant guttural shouts of men mobilizing. One by one, voices called out in the darkness. Miller, wounded but alive. Edwards and Jones. 2 more, Petty Officers Chen and Rodriguez, surfaced further out, coughing and sputtering. That was 6. 2 were missing, Lopez and Reynolds. Marcus felt his gut clench. He scanned the churning water, and his heart hammering against his ribs. This was his worst nightmare, a failed insertion, men down, and the enemy was coming. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos, a deep, thrumming roar that vibrated through the water and into his bones. It wasn't a boat. It was bigger. He looked up, his night vision goggles ruined by the explosion, and saw the monstrous shape of a patrol boat, its deck lined with armed men, powering directly towards them from a hidden cove to the north. It was a fast attack craft, bristling with machine guns. They were about to be not just captured, but annihilated. "Swim! Now! Towards the rocks!" Marcus screamed, pointing to a jagged line of black against the slightly lighter sky. It was a desperate gamble. The rocks offered no cover from the boat's guns, but it was the only direction that wasn't open water. The men, trained to follow orders even in the face of death, began to kick, their movements hampered by the cold and their heavy, waterlogged gear. As the enemy boat closed the distance, its spotlight blinding them, a voice boomed across the water in broken English. "Stop swimming! You are surrounded! Surrender or die!" Marcus pulled his service pistol from its waterproof holster. It was a laughably inadequate weapon against a machine gun nest on a boat, but it was something. His hand trembled slightly. It wasn't the cold. It was the weight of absolute failure. He had led his men into a slaughter. He looked at Miller, and who was pale even in the dim light, blood still seeping from his head wound. They were going to die here, in this godforsaken freezing water, 1,000 miles from home. "Sir?" Miller's voice was weak, questioning. He was looking at Marcus, waiting for an order, waiting for their leader to pull a miracle out of the chaos. Marcus saw the trust in his eyes, and it shattered him. He had nothing, no plan, no hope. For the first time in his career, Marcus Thorne, the unflappable SEAL, was frozen by fear. The enemy boat was 200 yards out and closing fast. The men on deck were raising their weapons. This was it. And then, the world changed. It started not with a bang, but with a series of sharp, almost simultaneous cracks. It was a sound Marcus knew intimately. High-caliber sniper fire. But it wasn't coming from the boat. It was coming from behind them, from the treacherous rocky shoreline they had been swimming towards. Before he could process it, 3 of the gunners on the patrol boat's deck crumpled instantly, their bodies pitching over the side without a single shot being fired in return. The remaining enemy fighters on the boat panicked, diving for cover, their spotlights swinging wildly, searching for a target they couldn't see. More cracks split the night. 2 more men fell, then another. The boat's coxswain, trying to turn the vessel, jerked violently as his head snapped back. The boat, now unmanned, continued its turn, and its engines screaming as it began to circle erratically. In the water, the SEALs were stunned into immobility. They treaded water, their eyes wide, watching a ghost dismantle a heavily armed patrol boat with impossible precision. The shooting was relentless, a metronome of death. Every crack found a mark. The men on the boat who tried to man the deck guns were dead before their hands touched the grips. Those who tried to take cover behind the armored plating were picked off in the narrow gaps. One by one, the threats were systematically eliminated. It wasn't just fast. It was beyond fast. It was surgical. It was as if a digital reaper was plucking souls from the deck in a pre-programmed sequence. The entire engagement, from the first shot to the last, lasted perhaps 10 seconds. When the shooting stopped, the patrol boat, its engines still running, drifted silently, a ghost ship carrying a cargo of the dead. Not a single round had been fired back at the unseen shooter. The silence that followed was heavier than the gunfire. It was filled with the lapping of waves and the stunned, ragged breathing of 7 SEALs. "What? What the hell was that?" Jones stammered, his voice trembling. Marcus couldn't answer. He was staring at the shoreline, trying to see through the darkness. A figure, small and almost indistinguishable from the rocks, moved. It rose from a prone position, slung a long rifle over its shoulder, and began picking its way down towards the water's edge. It wasn't one of his men. Their sniper, Johnson, was back on the mothership. This was someone else. An ally? In this location? It was impossible. "Steady," Marcus commanded, his voice regaining a sliver of its old authority. "Let's get to the rocks. Now." They swam with renewed, desperate energy, driven by confusion and a sliver of hope. Reaching the shallows, they crawled, exhausted, onto the cold, wet stones. As they did, the figure approached. It was a woman, dressed in dark, practical clothing, her face smeared with camouflage paint. She moved with a fluid, silent grace that was unnerving. The rifle on her back was a custom-built M40, a sniper's dream. Her eyes, visible even in the gloom, were calm and held a focus that was absolute. She stopped a few feet from Marcus, who was kneeling, trying to catch his breath. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne," she said. Her voice was low and even, as with no trace of the adrenaline that should have been coursing through her veins. "My name is Lieutenant Sarah Kincaid. I was embedded with a local resistance cell. We've been watching this position for 3 days. We saw the boat go up and the patrol vessel launch. I had a clean angle." Marcus stared at her, his mind reeling. A female sniper, embedded with resistance fighters, had just saved his entire platoon from certain death. He looked from her face to the silent, a drifting death ship out in the bay. He thought of the 25 men on that deck. 25 targets. Eliminated. In 10 seconds. 25, he whispered, almost to himself. "You got them all." Lieutenant Kincaid gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. They were bunched up, Easy shots after the first 3. They panicked, made it easier. Easy shots. The phrase hung in the air, a testament to a skill level that bordered on the supernatural. And the fear that had gripped Marcus's heart began to recede, replaced by a profound and humbling awe. He had been frozen, paralyzed by the weight of command and the specter of failure. And in his moment of absolute terror, this woman, a faceless ally in the dark, had acted with a cold, precise fury that had turned the tide of battle in the span of a single breath. Chief Miller, leaning heavily on Edwards, managed a weak grin. "Ma'am," he said, his voice full of admiration, "you can be on my team any day of the week." For the first time, a flicker of something that might have been a smile touched her lips, but it was gone in an instant. "The resistance fighters are securing the path to the compound," she said, her focus back on the mission. "The explosion and the gunfire will have drawn most of the guards. We have a narrow window, about 15 minutes. If we're going to complete your objective, we need to move, now." Marcus got to his feet, on the cold water sloshing in his boots. He looked at his men, battered, exhausted, but alive. He looked at the impossible scene in the bay. Then he looked at Lieutenant Kincaid, who was already calmly checking her rifle, her back to them, a silent sentinel waiting for them to get their bearings. The fear was gone. It had been vaporized, just like the enemy on that boat. In its place was a cold, hard resolve, sharpened by the example of the woman before him. He had failed as a leader in that moment of crisis, letting panic take hold. He would not fail again. He gathered his men. "You heard the lieutenant? Chen, Rodriguez? You're with me on point with Kincaid. Miller, you're in the middle. Edwards and Jones, bring up the rear. Lopez and Reynolds are out there, maybe captured, maybe worse. We complete the objective, and we find our men. That's the mission now." Lieutenant Kincaid didn't look back, but she spoke, but her voice just loud enough for him to hear. "The resistance spotted 2 men being dragged towards the compound's eastern barracks. They're likely alive. The barracks are near the main target building. New information. New hope." Marcus moved up to stand beside her. Up close, he could see the faint traces of exhaustion around her eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders. The 10-second miracle had cost her too. It wasn't just skill, and it was a monumental act of concentration and nerve. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he said, his voice low and sincere. It felt wholly inadequate. She finally turned to look at him, her gaze steady. "We all fail sometimes, Commander. The trick is to not let it be the last thing you do. Your men are alive. Let's keep them that way." With that, she turned and began a silent, practiced jog towards the compound, disappearing into the shadows like a wraith. Marcus watched her go for a split second, and then signaled his men. The 7 SEALs, soaked and shaken, fell into formation behind the phantom who had saved them. They moved into the darkness, following the woman who, with 25 perfectly aimed shots in 10 seconds, had redefined the meaning of backup. The fear had belonged to Marcus. The fight and the day now belonged to all of them. They had a compound to breach, 2 brothers to rescue, and a mission to complete. And they had a guardian angel with a sniper rifle leading the way.